welcome to the new Scots Whay podcast. And we're joined today by writer Andrew Raymond Drennan. Hello, Andrew.
Hi, Alistair.
And thanks for coming along and doing this.
Thank you.
We're here because you've just published your third novel, that's right, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
The Limits of the World. And, it's set, I remember about 4 years ago I was talking to you, and you just, The Immaculate Heart, I think, had just come out, which was your second novel.
Yeah.
And I asked you what you were doing next, and you said, you've got this idea, I'm going to set it in Korea, in North Korea.
Yeah.
I thought, oh, that's interesting, okay, I'd be interested to see what happens with that. And 4 years later, here it is, and you've done it. So, how did you get to this stage from that time, from that initial idea about wanting to write outside of Scotland?
I think you were probably the only person who didn't tell me that I was totally crazy. Because, I remember telling quite a few people about the idea for the book back then. And it's a bit weird when you haven't really started something, but you've got an idea for a book, and you want to tell the world about it, and it's a bit weird that you've not written a word, but you just feel like really strongly about it. And everyone told me that I was crazy for doing it, and when I tried to explain why, I couldn't really pin it down exactly. The first little germ of an idea for it came when I was lying on my couch in a flat in Paisley, really hungover, and I was watching BBC News. It was like a World Service programme, and they were running a wee half-hour documentary about North Korea. Right. And I'd always kind of wondered about what the country was really like, and I'd heard all the absurdist stories about Kim Jong-il's 18 holes in one when he first played golf and all that other stuff. And what I saw in that documentary was unlike anything I could ever have imagined, really. Yeah. And I started looking into some books and see if there were any books about it. I wanted to learn some more, and there was just nothing there. There was no non-fiction. That's changed, obviously, in the last couple of years. There's been a huge amount of escapees doing their memoirs, and it's almost become a bit of a given that there's this rich literature about North Korea around now, and that wasn't the case just a couple of years before. And when I started writing Limits, it was literally it would have been the first English language novel that was set in modern North Korea.
Well, what struck me about reading it is it's such a different place. It feels like a different time as well as a different place, and it's one of the things behind the book is this underground dealing in Western literature. It's kind of central to the book itself, and the secrecy of it's almost unbelievable that the levels of secrecy that are involved here. So how did you make sure that you were going to get this right? Because I imagine that was hugely important to you.
It was really hard. At the start, I had a hardcore of about 3 non-fiction books on North Korea that I was relying on for research, and I found that I'd exhausted them pretty quickly. I started falling back on, there was a lot of really good documentaries on YouTube. There was a Vice magazine one which was hugely important, another one called Holidays in the Axis of Evil, a really great reporter called Ben McIntyre, who was a big influence on my own reporter called Ben in the book. And I've forgotten the question.
Well, you see, there's 2 reporters, there's 2 Western reporters, an American and an Englishman. Yeah. And in a way you'd think you're going to see what unfolds through their eyes, but actually that's not true. The central character is Korean, and it's his struggle to remain true to himself and still remain true to what's a huge party system, isn't it?
Well, Han was always going to be the main guy. Right. He was my hero, basically. Yeah. I wanted to write a hero. Yeah. And Ben and Hal, the British and American characters, they were very much there for. They weren't always there, actually. Okay. There was originally, Han was just showing around Japanese tourists, and it was was too difficult to. The country was so sprawling and so absurd and complex that I needed two Westerners, so you can almost guide the reader through.
I think that works really well
through the book,
because it is such an unusual terrain that when they're being taken around Pyongyang and being shown the sights they're allowed to see, and then trying to see the things that they're not supposed to, you can imagine yourself in their position, whereas I think it's more difficult to imagine yourself in Han's position in that way, apart from the very human things that come out, like his, I suppose, his love of books. So this, the idea that art in some way kind of can set you free, was that at the centre to the idea of the book as well?
Yeah, that was the whole, I mean, before I start a book, there's an overarching sort of idea that's all, if I ever get stuck, that's what it's always going to come back to.
Yeah.
So with the Immaculate Heart, the main idea was, what if someone was to want and crave love so much that it drove them insane? With my first book, it was about how could someone's personal grief relate to a wider sort of societal grief, if you like, at the state of politics. And Limits was always going to be, in my mind, very much influenced by the German film The Lives of Others.
That is funny enough. I've got that written down. Was that an influence? So, for those that haven't seen it, you should maybe explain a little bit.
Well, it's set during the Stasi period in East Germany, and it's about a very talented playwright who is kind of operating in his own and with his own artistic freedom, but still under the constraints of the Stasi system. He's still giving the party what they want, and his plays have to represent the country the way that they want. And that starts to change after a series of personal traumas. And there's a really interesting idea about his partner possibly going to betray him, and it's about really having to choose over personal love for a political system or a political party. So in that sense, I pretty much just stole that template, because I think that film just felt totally timeless to me, and I just think people will be watching that film in 50, 100 years time. I really do.
So The Lives of Others was one influence. What other influences did you have when writing it?
Well, in a kind of textural sense, Revolutionary Road by Richard Yates was, when I used to describe the book to friends when I was working on it, I said that I was working on my Richard Yates novel, basically, because I just think that he had a way of speaking about love and desire and loneliness and longing in a way that I'd always wanted to, and but
because these are central themes in the book, and again that makes me wonder why Korea, where you felt that it was the place. I mean, I'm really pleased you have, because it took me to somewhere I'd never even considered going in a novel, but why you decided that Korea would be the setting for that, because these are universal themes, and I think your writing does deal with very universal themes.
Well, this then gets into, I guess, really my sense of alienation, I guess, from the Scottish lit scene at the time. I felt really, I was awful tired of being, any review that I got, I was always Scottish writer, Andrew Raymond Drennan, the Scottish book by Scottish writer, etc., etc. And I just wanted to, I don't know when it happened that Scottish writers weren't supposed to sort of branch out and do something a little bit bigger. You know, no one really questioned when Philip Roth set a book in the Czech Republic. And I felt really alienated from the whole scene. No one was speaking and in the same language, I felt like, as what I thought the state of the world at the time.
So it was too inward looking. That was the problem.
There was total navel gazing, and there was no sense of ambition, and I just wanted to do something that I just wanted to get as far away as possible, and I just thought, well, screw it. I mean, I'm just going to try and do what's the hardest task that I could set myself. I'm going to set a book in a country that no one knows anything about. And I mean, I guess there's an element of, hey, look at me, no hands type of thing, in trying to do that, but I've always been a bit of a show off. So.
But the way a lot of the things you talk about could have been in a similar setting to Immaculate Heart, but going back to that, when you said you were going to set it in North Korea, I was so pleased that someone, as you say, was showing, trying to do something completely different and in a different way. And as you say, when Ian Banks set his science fiction, and obviously in other universes, nobody would even think about that. But if he was to write, no, he did set some fiction overseas as well, but most writers just wouldn't have made that kind of leap.
Well, I guess that there was, apart from, it's not just a question of trying to get farther away, but trying to get like internally further away as well. I think I was in a bit of a weird place, like personally back then, and I just, there was something about this, the blank slate. It was a blank canvas, really, with North Korea, and I could kind of colour it really any way that I wanted. And when I watched those documentaries about North Korea, there was something about the isolation and disconnectedness from the rest of the world that I just sort of recognised elements, and I just thought it said so much about how we in the West particularly live, to do with, like, we have more ways than ever of connecting and talking, and I mean, God, look at us just sitting here doing this podcast, whereas it seems like when we've got more people than ever on antidepressants, and the suicide rate of young men continues to skyrocket, and there just seems to be a sense of the modern world is promising us a huge amount and delivering very little. Now, I don't want people to misinterpret this as my solution for it is that we should the people in North Korea are somehow happier than us.
That's quite not clear in the book.
Yeah, that's not at all what I mean. I don't mean that us with our consumerist ways and they who live so frugally and simply, that's the response. But my point is that they have there's something at root in humanity. There's something deeply, deeply wrong with us, that they have the same problems. I think we haven't solved any of them.
What I took from it was that no matter what the political system, it nearly always falls down by human frailty or human whether it's greed or whatever. That's where on paper a lot of systems look as though they might work, and then of course you add in the human element to it, and that's often where things break down.
Well, because the political system in North Korea is so unique in the sense that it completely it puts the self in a total vacuum. The self doesn't exist in North Korea. The only thing that matters is the party, Songbun, military first. It's all about, and actually at the ideology behind a lot of their politics is basically just outright racist, because their whole system is predicated on the notion that the Korean race is 100% superior to to anywhere else in the world, and that's why they have thrived so well, etc. And it's
the control that is shown by the government. It makes the life of others look, like a kind of hippie coin, almost. Somebody gets pulled in because their pictures of the great leader have got fingerprints on them and they've not been looked after, which is seen as a sign of dissent almost, or not caring. Children from a young age, the fact that they come out with something which is against the system, this is remembered and punished. It's almost unbelievable, which is the great thing about it, because then again it's absolutely rings true.
Well, there's it might be semi-apocryphal, but there is a story that obviously I didn't witness this, but there was a Westerner who was going around Pyongyang with his tourist group, and he was so worn down by the monotony and the repetition of all the rhetoric and stuff. And so he finally asked his minder, can I go somewhere that's not sort of about politics and stuff? And so they take him to the zoo, and he's walking around and he's seeing all the animals, fairly sort of subdued. And he gets to the bird cages, and he's thinking, oh, this is great, I'm finally, I'm experiencing a bit of freedom.
Yeah.
And he looks into the cage of a parrot, and the parrot yells back, "Long live the great leader Kim Il-sung." I'd like to think that story is true.
Yeah.
I think that it says quite a lot about the country, even if it's not. But
one of one of the good things about setting it where it is that the suppression of any art which isn't related to the government sanctioned art, if you like, is seen as completely subversive, and can be punished in all sorts of ways, which I don't think you could have in modern day in any other society. I'm not sure, but
you would be shot in North Korea if someone found a short story that you'd written that didn't praise the party or wasn't about the wonders of the socialist system. You would be executed, no question.
So this idea of kind of art as a subversive thing, when did that idea come from? That this was going to be central to the book.
Well, I mean, I knew that it was always going to be books. It had to be books that Han was going to get his hands on, purely on a technological basis. It's just easier to trade in books in the black market. But when I started talking to one of the translators that helped me with the Chozangul script in the book, it's very hard to translate, but I asked him if he knew of anyone who'd been to the north, or even any northerners themselves, and he managed to track a few down through the Korean community, and one of them had said to me that she'd not long started reading in English, and she was talking to me about Richard Yates.
Right.
And she was talking about April and Frank and Revolutionary Road, and she was saying how she couldn't believe that when she'd read this book, how you could love someone so fully as April does Frank, and rather than just loving the party, it was so unthinkable to her that you could do that you could love another person, or you could love a book, or you could love the idea that you have all these thoughts and feelings that you can express however way you want. I mean, it's so basic and obvious to us because we do it every single day
and I think nothing of it.
That's when I started to realise, well, I mean, beyond all of my artistic and fictional sort of ambitions, this is actually pretty damn real. And there are actually I did find a novelist, a North Korean novelist, obviously doesn't live there anymore, but they had written fiction whilst in in the north, and so there are North Korean novelists out there, just not very many of them.
Yeah, the thing that's brought it home to me was the idea that you can play a musical instrument, but have to be careful about what you play, because the idea that mastering a musical instrument, you are then free to express yourself in any which way. But that, it just seems like the most horrific caging of anyone's expression, freedom of expression.
Well, I really like this idea of May. The way that she sort of feels alive is through music. And
she's a cellist.
Yes. Yeah, very talented cellist, and Dvorak is her real passion, which she plays secretly in her building alone. And I really like the collision of these two languages, because so much of the book's tension is predicated on this idea of, I don't know, like you and I don't really know what's going through your head right now. We're both trying to work out each other, and there are great limits about what we'll know about that, and the only way we can do that is by talking more. And the way that they get to the heart of that is by Han wants to share his journal with her. He wants her to read what he doesn't think he can otherwise communicate, and for her, she wants to play her music to him, and I just think it's kind of, I wanted to make it so almost like the only thing that they couldn't do to express their truths was through language.
There's a line in the book about don't trust strangers. I think his father had passed it down to him or something like that. There was 2 rules in life, and in this way, in North Korea, it's almost don't trust anyone. They're even people that they consider friends, or certainly people that they work with, or there's a fantastic scene at the beginning where he sees a traffic warden or traffic police. And it starts to come up with fantasies about what might happen if they were to talk and everything, but then
that whole conversation's operating on like 3 or 4 different levels.
But that's nearly every conversation is, I think.
It's almost like, Han's trying to work out if she's like a true believer, if she's a party acolyte, and how much can he give away too much of himself here and just talk about how he really feels. But then she's trying to anticipate if he's just trying to trick her, and there's so many there's like double and triple negatives going on with how they're trying to talk.
And it's only really when Han and May, after going through a lot of things, decide that they will be truthful with each other as much as you can be, that they decide to change both their lives in as radical way as they can. There seems to be, and I think it's in your other books as well, this idea that relationships or love can save you, if you like, or save each other. That's not too grand.
No, I've always been I've tried to cast off this romanticism, but I just can't quite shift it. Like David Foster Wallace is my hero, and I cannot think of like a single instance where he kind of extols the virtues of love and being in love. And so it's almost like I feel if I try to talk about love or romantic love as being redemptive, or there's something about literature that can be morally instructive about love, that's somehow a bit kind of fey or something. But I just kind of, I don't really care anymore. Sincerity was a word that I kept coming back to when I was working on this. I just didn't care anymore about what anyone thought of. I was tired of the language games. I was tired of the feeling like I was just pouring out my own personal diary, as a means of writing fiction. And I just wanted to do something that was just completely, I actually thought that writing something that was just totally genuinely sincere was more radical than continuing down the path that I started. Looking around at what everyone else was doing, I just thought that was the natural way.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. That you're not writing for yourself, you're writing for some imagined reader, and I think when you start doing that, it can be problematic because you're not particularly honest. I think the love story is vital to this book because it drags you. It not drags the reader through, but it gives you something on a purely emotional level to root for.
And it was really dictated by Orwell as well, because Christopher Hitchens said he wrote a very famous article called Worst in 1984 in Vanity Fair a number of years ago, and he talked about this idea that he was going to be the first writer to write about North Korea and not mention 1984 or Orwell, and he just gave up after a couple of days. He thought, this is preposterous. They live in a slave state where you have to constantly worship a president who's dead as well. You can't share or talk about anything that's not about the party, and they make it impossible. And so that's why I started out not wanting to talk about Orwell or 1984, and I reached this point about halfway through where I just realised that I couldn't figure out what book it was that Han was going to give May, and it just made sense. And everything else afterwards just fell into place then, because everything after that point was just going to be, are they going to turn out like Winston and Julia?
You've got a parallel relationship that works. It works really well that way. I think if it's possible, you could give us a reading from the book, and then we'll come back and chat a little bit more about some of the themes that are in it.
Yeah, well, this is not too long into the novel. This is basically just Han sitting in his bed trying to process his first day back in Pyongyang.
Okay.
Han's evening read had to be taken in bed due to the draft from the loose living room window seals. After rummaging around under the creaking floorboard, dismissing various titles on impulse, he settled on The Sorrows of Young Werther. Something about the title and the forlornness of the man's face in the front cover spoke deeply to him. The man looked like a Germanic version of Han, eyes that looked sad no matter how they were used. He got into bed with a puff of warm air into his fists and wheeled his gas heater a little closer. As soon as he read the first line, he knew he had made the right choice. How happy I am to be away. My dear friend, what a thing is the heart of man. To leave you, whom I love so, from whom I was inseparable, and to be happy. Those 3 exclamations in a row, the honest joy of the man's realisation, and to speak of happiness when clearly he had been suffering. This was why he read. Werther's happiness and suffering somehow infused with his own, and Han felt himself to be in the novel, feeling what Werther was. Han wanted Werther to instruct him how to feel. They had much in common, except the most vital element Han craved, freedom. After an hour, Han realised he wasn't monitoring how many pages were going by, or comparing the thin slither of read to unread pages, as he so often did when plots tired or characters stopped speaking to him. He knew Werther wasn't a novel he could skip a few lines of here and there, or skim just for dialogue as he had when he was younger. It now felt to Han that the only satisfying explanation of what a novel is about was every word of the novel itself. Once when he was a small boy, his father had happened on an illicit recording of Schumann's Traumerei, and whilst listening to it his father had left the room. When he returned, he was distraught to find Han hadn't lifted the needle to pause the music. He replaced the needle, and Han heard a combination of piano keys that made him forget to breathe. When the passage ended, his father opened his eyes and explained to Han, "That is why I never skip a note of music. You never know what you might miss." Han stopped reading when his eyes merely drifted over the words, scanning rather than reading, and he realised he hadn't actually taken in anything that had been said the last 3 pages. The cold still got in under the blankets no matter how tightly he tried to seal up every leak. His feet felt like they were glowing with cold under his socks. He slid his bookmark into the page and left the book on his bedside cabinet, where a candle had been slithering down, an oily lagoon of wax shimmering below the flame. He thought of Rayong, asking him whether he had a girl at home, and Han found himself picturing the traffic warden he had met that morning. Fantasizing about strangers was the closest Han could get to relieving loneliness. In fantasies, strangers could love and desire him as fully and intensely as his imagination could summon. In what few short-lived relationships he had had, Han found that no matter what declarations were made, physical or verbal, between two people, there was something about the self that the other person would never have access to, like a wall too high to ever climb over. And as long as Han felt trapped on the other side of that wall, love would always be somehow incomplete. What he liked so much about reading was it broke the illusion that one person's interior life was any less complex than another's, regardless of how unaware they were of it or failed to articulate it. But in real life, all Han's partner's feelings and emotions, which were incredibly deep and intricate and complex, and seemed to beg for explanation every single moment of the day, could never hope to be understood the same way Han understood his own interior life. He was forever locked out of anyone else and forever locked in himself. With a fantasy, Han built the other person's self for them, like a novelist does, and in a weird paradox made the imagined love feel somehow more real and tangible than actual love. His cold hands felt unmysterious and clumsy travelling down his stomach towards his erection. Sexual inexperience made his body feel underused and torpid. Over time, he tried to convince himself that masturbation was a perfectly adequate replacement for sex, that the ultimate feeling, his own sensory, neurological and ontological pleasure, was ultimately the same, particularly the ontological part, because nothing is as unique like a snowflake yours as an orgasm. But it was a lie. Masturbation was a lie that said it was a fraud that another person could make you more supremely yourself. It was a failure on a human level. Sex is to masturbation is what comedy is to telling a joke to an empty room. Because to Han, half the pleasure of sex was derived from making someone else feel ecstasy, their foreign hands becoming warm and familiar, gently figuring out where to touch in search of the kind of orgasm that makes your IQ disappear. With masturbation, as soon as the orgasm was over, whatever fantasy he had conjured, no matter how elaborate and vivid it seemed just a few seconds ago, quickly vanished. This was where it became complicated for Han. The only cure, it was really more of a treatment than a cure, for loneliness was the exact thing that made him lonely in the first place. He simply couldn't connect in any real meaningful way with another person. The harder he tried to imagine the traffic warden's touch, the more alone he felt.
Fantastic. I'm really pleased you read that because that's one of my favourite bits in the book. This idea of the fantasy and the imagination which can't be denied, no matter, even though the physical art itself, the book or the song or anything like that, it can be suppressed. The imagination, you refer a few times to the idea of the man who is locked up but still is free in his thoughts, and how he fantasizes and how he dreams, and actually this idea of the difference between masturbation and a real relationship. When he meets the Pyongyang Book Club, he can share experiences or meet people who have shared experiences in art as well. Was that this idea of the role of art in society is one I'm really interested in, and the ability to bring people together?
I think it's about unlocking. Really, there's obviously a huge amount of cage imagery in there and prison imagery. I know some literal prisons as well.
Yeah.
Purely because I think that art and love are absolutely the keys to unlocking these cages that we find ourselves in, because we are completely we're just cut adrift in the world, and I think there's something about being in a bed alone that it's the great equalizer. It's like everyone, I like to think, in the world, no matter what country that they're in, no matter under what regime, I think we all just become the same when we're alone. Really.
But something like, you know, reading a book or listening to a piece of music or seeing a film or something like that, takes us out of that.
Yeah, this is the cure. I mean, Jonathan Franzen wrote a wonderful essay all about it, and David Foster Wallace talked extensively about this idea that reading it lets you in a way that you really can't in another medium. I mean, I guess maybe the closest ones are film and music, and there are things that those can do that literature can't. But I think when you're talking about finding a way in and unlocking another person, there's something that, and I'm going to sound a bit sort of semi-mystical talking about this, but there's just something about literature that it just lets you in a way.
Yeah, and this is the place to talk about it, because I agree with you completely. There's a lot of that, I suppose, in terms. There's a lot of philosophy in the book as well, specifically with quotes from kind of Wittgenstein, things like that. What I was really interested in was this idea of Juche, the Korean. Is that philosophy? Would that be fair enough to say?
It's an ideology. It's I guess that. I mean, there's no point in me trying to explain it, because there are dozens and dozens of books being written about it in Korea, and no one actually can land on what it actually means. I mean, the simplest way that I could explain it is that Korea is best, a unified Korea is even better, and Koreans are better than everyone else. Yeah, so this is almost a philosophy which backs up the other government point of view. It is completely a mechanism, a self-serving mechanism to prop up the system. Yeah, and it seems to run through. I suppose it's used in a way as a kind of brainwashing technique from a young age, because it's kind of put from right at the beginning. It's even used to pick the national football team as well. That's true. Yeah. There are really talented North Korean footballers that can't get into the team because their families Songbun, they are I guess class status as viewed through the previous generations isn't privileged enough. Wow. I suppose there have been similar things to that in other places, but that's fascinating. Maybe Scotland should consider that. Well, there was a while where I think some people would say, you know, if you weren't from the right school, or you wouldn't get in certainly in certain teams. You said about cages and prisons and literal prison. There are horrors throughout the book, or maybe not horrors, more such of things that bring you up short. So I can't believe that. But then there is the Camp 22 chapter, which is properly horrific and visceral, and it really kind of switches the feel of things. I don't know if that was a deliberate thing or not, but suddenly you go, God, this is hell on earth as much as you could get. I couldn't live with myself if that chapter wasn't in there, and there was an editor at another publishing house had asked me to remove it, and I refused, because taking that chapter out is almost like pretending that the reality of the country isn't what it is. And no, I needed a change in tone purely because for structural reasons we're moving into more of the last third of the book is a lot more is quite fast paced, and there's even some action scenes almost. There's literally a car chase. Yeah, there is. I needed something that was really just going to lay out, look, what's actually at stake here on a human level, what's actually at stake. And I think you're at that point in the book, if you're still with the book at that point, then you've kind of accepted the country. Yeah. and now it's time to start dealing with the less fun stuff.
The reality.
Yeah, the stuff that's not just absurd but is actually upsetting. Mm-hmm. It was upsetting to write, actually. It was really unpleasant to write. I remember vividly the night that I wrote the 99% of that material, and I stayed up all night, and I just remember the sun coming up through my living room window the next morning, and I just felt so much relief that it was over and I could get back to my other characters.
I'm surprised that someone asked you to take out, maybe I'm not, but it's definitely needed, because you've got to the stage of the book, you think I know how this is perhaps going to go, and then you get the strength of feeling, you learn more about Han because of where he's come from, and you're right, this is not simply absurd, this is absolutely, for some people, horrific. Mm-hmm. So I think it does the job, hopefully, that you meant it to. A question that came to me was about the idea of courage as well, the idea of bravery when you have nothing to lose or when you have everything to lose. There seems to be a point where, is one more courageous than the other? And I'm not sure, I don't know. Because Han has kind of got nothing to lose. He's set himself up.
I think someone says that at some point. Actually, I think I think the
is it your
I think the authorial voice says, or is it Ryong? I think
I think it's Ryong. He says he's got to go back because he has got family.
Yes,
he has got things to lose, and there maybe is no answer to it. It was just an interesting question about it. It's maybe not bravery, it's just this idea of May and Han have got to the point where they've got to leave it behind because there's no going back for them. You say, well, you've got the courage to see this through. Yes, I have. Whereas, is Leon going back? Is that the braver thing to do? I don't know. It was just something which it's an interesting question that popped up.
Well, one thing that I've been I've just finished writing a blog for wardstones.com that's going up in a couple of days, and the title of it is "Would You Risk Death to Read a Book?" Mm-hmm. And I really hope that if I've succeeded in my job as a novelist, that I will really make people think hard about, really, would you really, if you're in the same position, would you have the strength of your convictions as what Han and May have?
Yeah.
Because I put myself in that position, and I used to call myself a book lover, but having talked to North Korean dissidents who risk their lives every day just to read George Eliot.
It goes, I suppose, to the point that you made right at the beginning. We talked about the West and how there are problems of almost excess in the West. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we've got, how many bookshops we've got in the city? Not as many as we used to have, but still plenty. We can walk into any books and get any book that we pretty much like. And the cost of just finding, one copy of E. Cummings' poetry, and what that actually means to hold on to that, and I don't want to give anything away.
Yeah, the thing that we both want to talk about.
Yeah,
we can't talk about.
Yeah, it's exactly that. It's just such a collision, and then you see. I said before, it's like going in time and place, and that works the other way around. This is literally especially when the American Westerners, and I think for Western readers, it's cultures clashing in a way that you kind of don't expect, and you end up questioning your own kind of culture, for want of a better word, as well.
It's really just about asking, particularly towards the end, without giving anything away, are we, if you imagine yourself living in North Korea under all of those constraints, and then you think back to our own lives, these things are incredibly complex to talk about, and in a way I'm not sure that I'm qualified to do it.
Well, that's fair enough, but I think what you've managed to do is not be overly punishing on either system, whether it's a Western. I know that's a huge generalisation, but you know the system that Ben and Hal are from, and also the North Korean system, and you let the reader, I think, decide for themselves, and they can make up their own, you know, judgments on it.
I think the best way that I could articulate it would be to kind of suggest if you're going to remain locked inside yourself, you're doomed to loneliness regardless of what you're surrounded by.
Yeah.
That's the closest I can get to some sort of an explanation about it.
What I should say is I haven't mentioned it at all, but I think the book's beautifully written. I think some of the stuff in it is just fantastic. Some of the aphorisms you use, the phrases you use, you can see the amount of notes I've made in the book itself. I've noted them down. I'd like, if I could, if it's possible, I'm going to read the very end bit from hand. Is that okay? Is that yeah? Because this is how the book finishes, and I think it sums up a lot of what the book is about. Han's final entry. And even though I am in here and you are in there, someday in any given place, a stranger might play a piece of music that lifts the roof off the world, or writes a book that dissolves the bars of a cage, or drops a foot in the ocean and raises the water just slightly enough on the other side of the world for them to notice, and that stranger will no longer feel like a stranger. And as you read these words, you might know who I really am. They are the only door I can open, the only cage I can unlock, the limits of everything I am, the limits of the world. I think that's one of the best things I've read in a long, long time.
I worked on that. Oh my God, I know I shouldn't take people behind the scenes of this sort of stuff. That got rewritten so many times, and I struggled so hard to. It was basically like I'd been trying to write that passage for about 4 years almost. I mean, in my head a lot of the time, and it was always there. And I wish I could say that some kind of alchemy struck when I started typing it out, but it really wasn't. I really had to work on that one. But
work it and rework it till you.
I'm quite proud of it.
And so you should be. I think that's the perfect place to finish. So Andrew, thanks so much for coming in and talking to us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
And all the best with the book. I think it deserves to reach a wide audience. And we'll be back soon with someone completely different. Cheers.